The cameras were rolling, the audience was cheering, and then 17-year-old Michael Thompson placed his hand over his heart and said something that made the entire Family Feud studio fall silent. It wasn't just what he said, someone else's gift, but the way he said it, with the quiet reverence of someone who understood that every heartbeat he felt was a miracle borrowed from tragedy, a second chance made possible by another family's ultimate sacrifice. Steve Harvey had been hosting for over a decade, but he had never seen anything like the expression on Michael's face when he answered the survey question about things that give you life. There was gratitude there, yes, but also a weight that no 17-year-old should have to carry, the knowledge that he was alive because someone else had died, that his future had been purchased with another family's grief. Michael Thompson had been living with a stranger's heart for 2 years, ever since the night when his own heart had finally given up its 18-year battle against a congenital defect that had defined his entire childhood. He had spent most of his life in and out of hospitals, watching other kids play from hospital windows, dreaming of a normal life that seemed impossible until a phone call at 2 a.m. changed everything. The heart that now beat in Michael's chest had belonged to 19-year-old David Rodriguez, a college sophomore who had died in a motorcycle accident on a rainy Tuesday night in Phoenix. David had been an organ donor, and in the space of a single evening his death had given life to 6 different people across the country. Michael had been at the top of the transplant list, and David's heart had been a perfect match. The Thompson family had written letters to David's family through the organ donation network, expressing their gratitude and sharing updates about Michael's recovery. The Rodriguez family had written back, sharing memories of their son and saying how much it meant to know that part of him was still alive, still making a difference in the world. But they had never met face to face. Organ donor families and recipients often chose to remain anonymous, protecting themselves from the complex emotions that could arise from such profound connections. But today, unbeknownst to Michael, that was about to change. The Thompson family had been selected for Family Feud through the standard application process, but the show's producers had also been contacted by the Rodriguez family, who had seen Michael's story in a local news feature about young organ transplant recipients. They had asked if there was any way to arrange a meeting, and the producers, understanding the extraordinary nature of such a request, had worked with both families to create what they hoped would be a healing moment of connection. Michael stood at the Family Feud podium, wearing a blue button-down shirt that his mother had chosen because she thought it brought out his eyes that were brighter and more alive than they had been in years, thanks to the healthy heart that now pumped blood efficiently through his body. He looked like any other healthy teenager, tall and lean with an easy smile, but those who knew his story could see the small scar on his chest where surgeons had cracked open his ribcage to install his second chance at life. The game had been proceeding normally. The Thompson family was competing against the Martinez family from California, and both sides were playing with good energy and enthusiasm. Michael's parents had provided solid answers, his younger sister had scored well, and the atmosphere had been exactly what you'd expect from a wholesome family game show. But when it was Michael's turn at the buzzer for the category Things That Give You Life, everything changed. "All right, Michael," Steve Harvey had said, approaching the podium with his usual warm energy. "Things that give you life. What keeps you going, young man?" Michael had looked at Steve, then placed his hand over his heart in a gesture that seemed unconscious but was filled with meaning for anyone who understood his story. "Someone else's gift," Michael had said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the studio pay closer attention. The answer hung in the air for a moment. It wasn't the kind of response typically heard on Family Feud. Not funny, not obvious, not the sort of thing that made for easy television. Steve paused, his entertainer's instincts telling him that something significant had just happened. "Someone else's gift," Steve repeated slowly, his voice thoughtful. "That's a very specific answer, Michael. Can you tell us more about that?" Michael hesitated for a moment, then looked directly at Steve with the kind of honesty that only comes from someone who has faced mortality and emerged grateful. "2 years ago, my heart stopped working," Michael said, his voice clear and steady. "I was dying, and then someone I never met, someone who died too young, gave me his heart, literally. Every beat in my chest is someone else's gift. Every breath I take, every day I live, it's all borrowed time made possible by a stranger's generosity." The studio had fallen completely silent. This wasn't typical game show conversation, but everyone present understood they were witnessing something profound and real. Steve had set down his cards and approached Michael, his professional demeanor shifting to something more personal and caring. "Michael," Steve said gently, "that's an incredible story. How old were you when you received your transplant?" 15, Michael replied. I'd been sick my whole life, born with a heart defect. I spent more time in hospitals than at home. My parents were told I probably wouldn't make it to my 18th birthday without a transplant. Steve nodded, his expression showing deep respect for Michael's journey. And the person who gave you this gift, do you know anything about them? His name was David Rodriguez, Michael said, and his voice carried the reverence of someone speaking about a hero. He was 19, a college student. He died in an accident, but he was an organ donor. His family said yes to giving his organs to people who needed them, even in their worst moment of grief. What Michael didn't know was that behind the scenes, the show's producers were making final preparations for something unprecedented. In a holding area just off the main studio, David Rodriguez's family was waiting. His parents, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez, his younger sister Elena, and his girlfriend Sarah. They had traveled from Phoenix specifically for this moment, carrying with them 2 years of wondering about the young man who carried their beloved David's heart. Steve had been briefed about the surprise, and he made a decision that would define not just that episode, but his understanding of what television could accomplish at its very best. Michael, Steve said, his voice carrying a gravity that commanded the attention of everyone in the studio, I want you to know that your gratitude, your appreciation for this gift that means everything to families who make the decision to donate their loved ones' organs, they need to know that their loss created something beautiful. Steve paused, looking directly at Michael with an expression that was impossible to read. In fact, Steve continued, there are some people here today who I think you should meet. The studio doors opened, and Maria Rodriguez entered first, followed by the rest of David's family. The moment they appeared, Michael's face went completely white. He had seen their photos in the letters they had exchanged, but seeing them in person was overwhelming in a way he had never anticipated. Maria Rodriguez was a small woman with graying hair and eyes that held both deep sadness and profound love. She approached Michael slowly, her own emotions clearly visible on her face. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but filled with strength. Michael, she said, I'm David's mom. I'm Maria. Michael's eyes filled with tears immediately. He tried to speak but couldn't find words for a moment that felt impossibly significant. Mrs. Rodriguez, he finally managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to thank you. I don't know how to tell you what your son's gift has meant to me, to my family. Maria reached out and placed her hand on Michael's chest, right over where David's heart was beating. Can I feel it? She asked quietly. Michael nodded, placing his own hand over hers. For a moment the entire studio held its breath as a mother felt her son's heart beating in another young man's chest. Strong, Maria whispered, tears streaming down her face. Just like David, always so strong. Steve Harvey had witnessed thousands of emotional moments in his career, but this was something beyond television, beyond entertainment. This was life and death and love and healing happening in real time in front of millions of viewers. Carlos Rodriguez, David's father, approached next. He was a tall man with calloused hands and the bearing of someone who had worked hard his entire life. When he looked at Michael, his eyes were filled with something that looked like wonder. You look healthy, Carlos said simply. David would be so happy to see you looking healthy. I am healthy, Michael replied. For the first time in my life, I'm completely healthy. I can run. I can play sports. I can do everything I never thought I'd be able to do, all because of David. Elena Rodriguez, David's younger sister, had been hanging back, but now she stepped forward. She was close to Michael's age, and her resemblance to the photos Michael had seen of David was striking. David always wanted to help people, Elena said, her voice steady despite her tears. He was studying to be a teacher. He wanted to make a difference in kids' lives. In a way, he's still doing that through you. Sarah, David's girlfriend, approached last. She carried with her a small wrapped package. David had just bought this, she said, handing the package to Michael. It's a watch. He was saving up for it for months. He said he wanted something that would help him keep track of time, help him make every moment count. We thought maybe it should go to someone who understands how precious time really is. Michael unwrapped the package with trembling hands. Inside was a simple but elegant watch, engraved on the back with David's initials and the date he had purchased it. I can't accept this, Michael said, but Maria Rodriguez shook her head. David would want you to have it, she said. Time is the most precious gift we have. David's time was cut short, but through you, he gets more time. You're living the life he can't live. You're making the most of every moment he can't have. Steve Harvey had been standing back, allowing the families to connect, but now he stepped forward to address the studio and the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve said, his voice carrying the weight of profound emotion, "what we're witnessing here is something sacred. This young man carries another young man's heart. These families are connected by tragedy and by hope, by loss and by life." He looked at Michael and the Rodriguez family, who had formed a circle around each other. "Michael, you said that every heartbeat is someone else's gift, but I want you to understand something else. The life you're living now, the future you're building, that's your gift back to David. That's how you honor what he gave you." Steve began removing his suit jacket, the same jacket he wore for every taping. "This jacket has been with me through every show," Steve said. "But today, it represents something bigger than television. It represents the connections that bind us together, the love that transcends even death." Steve draped the jacket around both Michael and Maria Rodriguez, creating a symbolic embrace that included them both. "Michael, you are living proof that love is stronger than death, that generosity can triumph over tragedy. And Maria, Carlos, Elena, Sarah, you are living proof that families can find healing in the most unexpected places." The studio audience had been completely silent throughout this extraordinary exchange, but now they erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. Not the typical game show cheering, but something deeper, something that recognized the sacred nature of what they had witnessed. The game resumed, but it had been transformed. Both families played together, celebrating every point as a victory for life itself, for second chances, for the miraculous gift of organ donation. Michael answered 2 more questions, and both times his responses reflected his newfound perspective on life and gratitude. When Steve asked about things you never take for granted, Michael said, "Every single heartbeat." When he asked about things that connect us to each other, Michael looked at the Rodriguez family and said, "Love that doesn't end with death." The episode ended with both families embracing, with Michael wearing Steve's jacket and David's watch, with the understanding that they had all been part of something larger than a game show. They had created a moment of healing, a bridge between grief and gratitude, a testimony to the power of organ donation to transform tragedy into hope. The episode aired 3 months later and became one of the most watched and most shared Family Feud episodes in history. Organ donation organizations reported a significant increase in registrations following the broadcast. Medical professionals praised the episode for its sensitive and accurate representation of organ transplantation. Most importantly, families affected by organ donation felt seen and honored by mainstream media. Michael kept both Steve's jacket and David's watch, but more than that, he kept the sense of purpose that came from understanding his role as a living testament to David's generosity. He became a speaker for organ donation awareness, sharing his story at high schools and medical conferences, helping other young people understand the importance of becoming organ donors. The Rodriguez family found a new sense of meaning in their grief, understanding that David's legacy lived on not just in Michael, but in the awareness and education that came from sharing their story. They stayed in close contact with Michael, becoming an extended family bound by love rather than blood. Steve Harvey learned something profound about the nature of life and death, about the connections that bind human beings together across tragedy and hope. He had discovered that sometimes the most important role television can play is not to entertain but to heal, to connect, to remind people of what really matters. The watch that David had bought for himself became Michael's most treasured possession, but its real value wasn't in keeping time. It was in reminding him that every second was precious, every heartbeat was a gift, every day was an opportunity to live worthy of the sacrifice that had made his life possible. Years later, Michael would become a cardiac surgeon himself, dedicating his career to helping other people with heart conditions. He would often tell his patients about the day he met the family of his organ donor, about the moment when grief met gratitude and created something beautiful. Because that's what love looks like when it refuses to be stopped by death. That's what healing sounds like when families choose connection over isolation. And that's what happens when borrowed time becomes a gift, not just to the recipient, but to everyone who witnesses the miracle of life continuing through love, generosity, and the profound courage of families who choose to turn their darkest moments into someone else's brightest hope. Michael Thompson carried David Rodriguez's heart, but he also carried his legacy, his love, and his family's incredible gift of turning their loss into someone else's life. And every heartbeat was a reminder that the most beautiful things in life are often borrowed from the generosity of strangers who become family through the most extraordinary circumstances.